Buenos días a todos, soy Carmen Muñoz, soy bibliotecaria del Servicio de Apoyo a la Docencia y Investigación de la Biblioteca Complutense y os doy la bienvenida al seminario Planning Your Research to Publish in High Impact Journals que hemos organizado en colaboración con nuestros compañeros de ESCO y en el que el doctor Gareth Dyke nos hablará acerca de la redacción de artículos científicos encaminada a que sean aceptados por las editoriales. Empezamos, cuando quieras, Enrique, todo tuyo.
Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias, por supuesto, a la Universidad Complutense. Muchas gracias especialmente a Carmen y por la organización de este evento. Por supuestísimo, muchas gracias a Bentham Science, que es quien nos ha facilitado poder realizar esta sesión, y al doctor Gareth Dyke, que es quien la va a impartir. Yo soy Enrique Casain, soy el Regional Sales Manager en EBSCO, empresa que posiblemente conozcáis, posiblemente sepáis que somos proveedores de revistas científicas dentro de la institución. Me acompaña a mi lado Franz Letteston. Franz es el director comercial corporativo a nivel mundial de Bentham. Franz conoce muy bien al doctor Gareth Dyke y, por lo tanto, le voy a ceder la palabra para que pueda hacer él las presentaciones. Adelante, Franz, por favor.
Gracias. Sí, me llamo Franz Lettenström, soy el director global de ventas de Bentham Science. Vivo y trabajo desde Tarragona, por lo tanto, no estoy muy lejos. Y Gareth es nuestro director de relaciones con los autores. Y es un buen científico, es paleontólogo, es editor-in-chief de una revista de paleontología. Bueno, le dejo la palabra porque él es el que hablará, pero lo hará en inglés. Espero que no sea un problema.
Perfecto. So, Gareth, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wow, we have to switch to English. I'm really sorry, everybody. Hope that's going to be okay. My name's Gareth, and thank you very much to Enrique, to all the colleagues for the opportunity to give this presentation today. I'm very fortunate. Thank you so much. Let me just try to share my screen really quickly. We'll see if it works. Should do. Let's just see if it works. Just 1 second. Okay, perfect. You should be able to see my screen.
Yes,
It's working. Fantastic. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. So, we are going to be talking today about planning your research in order to get it published in high impact journals. Bentham Science is the name of the company that we are presenting on behalf of. Franz will be able to answer any questions. Enrique too, if you have questions at the end of the event about Bentham Science specifically. My expertise, and once again, this is me. My name is Gareth. I worked for a number of years at a range of different universities in the UK, in Ireland, which is why my English sounds a little bit strange, perhaps, and also now working and living over in Hungary. So I'm doing this presentation today from Budapest. I have experience writing and publishing academic articles. I've published myself about 350 academic papers in peer-reviewed journals. As Franz mentioned, I also work for a journal, a Taylor and Francis journal called Historical Biology. I've been doing that for 19 years or something like that as the editor-in-chief. So what we hope to be able to share with you today is expertise both from a publisher perspective, but also from a researcher, from an author perspective, helping you to get your work published in leading international journals. And of course, I can't see the team's screen at the moment, but if you have questions or comments, please do put them into the chat box. We'll have lots of opportunity, lots of time a little bit later on in our time together for us to answer any of your questions. And indeed, if you'd like to get more information about the kinds of training that we provide at Bentham Science, then do also get in touch, because we've got loads loads of different training presentations about different aspects of writing and publishing and the publication cycle in English, which we can share with you. We can give you links to videos. We can give you other training presentations live in the future if that's what you would like. So you're probably thinking, what are we going to be talking about in our webinar today? Well, we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about journal selection. We're going to talk about how you can maximize your impact, planning your research for publication in high impact journals. And then we're going to finish in the 3rd part by talking a little bit about your title and your abstract in order to maximize impactful publishing. So planning your research for publication in high impact journals. It starts, of course, by selecting those journals. And the point of all of this, the reason that we do all of this training, is to help you become more effective as a writing and publishing academic researcher. That's the whole point of all of this. That's what we do. That's what Bentham Science and these training presentations are all about, providing help, tips, tricks, insights, feedback, and information to help you be more effective with your writing and with your publishing. So let's get going. Bentham Science, of course, a major international publisher of journals and ebooks. If you haven't had the chance to look at the Bentham Science catalog, I do encourage you to have a look at eurekaselect.com. Have a look at all of the different fantastic journals and fantastic ebooks that Bentham provides. Eureka Select is the platform. It's a portal. You can go in there, you can type in keywords, you can search the Bentham content, you can see all of the different kinds of journals that Bentham Science publishers are producing. So 163 different journals at the moment, more than 1,300 ebooks at the moment. So there's bound to be some content, there's bound to be some information in there that will be interesting and important for you. So Eureka Select, have a look at that platform. We'll share with you the links at the end of this presentation today. Enough about the company. Let's talk about writing and publishing. 30,000 journal articles published every week across all of the 56,000 different peer-reviewed journals that are out there in the world. So not all of them, of course, are looking at the kind of research that you're writing and publishing, but the point is there are a large number of different journals that you could select for your next research project. It varies depending upon your research area. Some research areas, engineering, natural sciences, chemistry, biology, medicine, have a lot more journals than other research areas like social sciences, humanities, linguistics, but nevertheless, picking a journal at the beginning of the research process is very, 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 very important. Lots of researchers, they do research, they write up a paper, and then they think, where am I going to publish this piece of research? And that is not the most efficient way to plan your research for publication in high impact factor journals. What we do recommend, and I take it from my experience and the experience working with lots of other publishers, lots of other companies, do your research, think about the take-home message, the key thing that you want people reading your research to get out of that reading experience, the main message of the paper. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit later when we talk about titles and abstracts, but you need to have a journal in mind before you begin the writing process. Very important to start your research journey after you've done the work, after you've collected data, after you know the take-home message, the main message of your research. think then about journal selection so that you can ensure, you can make sure that your research stands out from the crowd. And take it from me, lots of very successful academic researchers around the world, they don't start to write until they've decided on a target journal. Very, very important. I'm going to say this again and again in our presentation today, but there are 3 things to think about. 3 things to think about before you start to write your next academic paper. Your message. We talked about that already. What's the key takeaway from your research? What's the message? That's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is your audience, your readership. And that's the journal in which you publish your paper. So message, audience, journal selection, and thirdly, structure. There are 3 things to know before you begin to write an academic article: message, audience, and structure. And if you forget everything else from our presentation today, I hope that you will remember this tip: message, audience, and structure before you begin to write your next academic paper. So journal selection is very, very important. As we've already talked about, people don't start to write until they've decided on that target journal, because every journal's different. What kind of paper are you going to write? Will it be a letter, a rapid communication? Will it be a commentary? Will it be an original piece of research? So you've got your message, you've done your research. The next step is to select a journal. And this is done by talking to other colleagues, by talking to editors, by making pre-submission inquiries to journals. I would recommend, and this is a very good tip if you're listening to this and you're working on your PhD or you're a younger researcher, make a list of journals in your field where you would like to publish your research, and then rank that list of journals by impact factor. And we would always encourage everybody to aim high. Look at the impact factor. Look at the reputation of that journal within your field. Look at the reach of that journal within your field. Different research areas have different journals that people tend to read. And also, is the journal accessible? Is the journal open access or not? When researchers pick a journal for their publications, they do tend to think about impact factor. They do tend to think about reputation. They do tend to think about the reach of that journal within their field, and they do tend to think about accessibility, open access. Effective journal selection is a marriage of research and publication. As we start to think, I've got some research, I've got my message, I know what I want to give to people, I know what I want my readers to experience when they look at my paper. Where am I going to publish that paper for maximum impact? So reach out to journal editors. There's nothing stopping you from writing 20 or 50 or 100 emails out to different journal editors and inquiring whether they would be interested or not in publishing your paper. Bigger journals, your Natures, your Sciences, they encourage pre-submission inquiries, and they do that because they don't want thousands of submissions coming into their journal every week. They ask authors to make pre-submission inquiries, and so you should do this with all of your papers. Get a journal lined up, get an editor interested in your next article before you begin to write. We'll talk about this again in a moment, but there are some keys to effective journal selection. Aiming high, as we've already talked about. Make a list of journals in your field where you would like to see your work published. Rank that list by impact factor, maybe 10 journals, maybe 5 journals, maybe 20 journals, and choose appropriately with your next submission. Reach out to editors, ask them if they'd be interested in seeing your research published in their journal. You can send the title, you can send the abstract. We'll talk about writing those different sections of your paper in a moment. But if you learn to sell and manage your article submissions to international journals, you will be much, 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 much more successful at writing, publishing, and targeting your research into high impact factor journals. So we talked about this already, but think about what you want from a journal when you choose a journal for your next article publication. Authors tend to want speed. They want their papers to come out as fast as possible. Of course they do. Nobody wants to wait for years and years for their papers to get published. Authors also want a decent impact factor. Of course they do. Their university, research councils, national governments are interested in where we publish our research. Reporting back is important. And also, people tend to want reach and readership, and into that feeds open access, because as many people as possible want to be able, should be able to read your next paper. So have a think about this. You're planning your publications, you're thinking about where to publish your research. It's also then important to understand what some of the key differences are between the different journals that we have access to as researchers. You may very well be looking for what we call a gold open access journal, which is a fully open access publication. These journals only publish fully open and online content. Famous Public Library of Science, Biomed Central, big publishers like Frontiers, for example, are fully gold open access publishers. Bentham has a portfolio of some 40 fully open access journals which are available to you as outlets for your research. So do have a look again, as I mentioned a bit earlier, at Eureka Select if you're interested in seeing the Bentham catalogue. So gold open access journals. Green open access is different. This is where you publish a paper in a journal that has a subscription paywall, the traditional model for publishing. We've all done it. We're all familiar with lots of journals that are not accessible to everybody. We don't have to pay to publish in those journals, but not everybody can access that content. But in a number of cases, in most cases these days, you will be able to put your final accepted version of your article onto a repository, your website, for example, ResearchGate, PubMed Central, into a preprint server, potentially. This is called green open access. And it's important to understand the differences between these different models. If you have questions, Franz, Enrique, and I will be happy to answer them at the end of this session. But when you select a journal, be clear about the kind of journal that you are picking, because gold open access publishing requires a payment of a fee from the author or from the author's institution. This is called an APC, an article processing charge, and these can be quite a lot of money depending upon the journal that you've selected. As I mentioned, we'll be here to answer any of your questions, but I would recommend that you write to editors. You make pre-submission inquiries when your papers are ready to be written, when you've got your research, when you've got your message, and you're looking for your audience. You want to pick a journal. And by the way, once you've selected a journal, that answers for you many of the questions that researchers often have about writing their papers. People ask us all the time, how much information should I put into the introduction? How much information? How to write the methods? What goes into the results? What goes into the discussion? If you've selected a journal, then many of those questions are answered already, because you can copy the structure of other papers previously published in that journal to make sure that you have enough information in those different sections. So make pre-submission inquiries. Write to editors, write to as many as you like. This will help you to target journals for your publications. You can reach out with the title of the paper. You can reach out with the abstract, and we'll give you an email template at the end of our presentation today that you can use in order to do this. So if you're thinking, what is he talking about? I've already fallen asleep. There are 3 things to know before you start to write. And as I mentioned already, if you forget everything else from our presentation today, please try to remember this message. The 3 things to know before you start to write your next paper, your message, your audience, and your structure. Very, very, very important. And in other presentations, we can help you with training to manage the submission process, how to manage peer review, how to promote your work, and make sure that you have an effective mentorship group of people who can act as peer reviewers when your paper goes into an international journal. And other common issues that researchers face, things like open access, things like the use of preprint servers, we are able to help you with. Because, of course, we are interested in impact. We are interested as researchers in maximizing our impact. Of course, your university wants you to create as much impact as possible. Your research group, your professor, your funding agency, your national government, they are thinking about funding, supporting research that has the maximum impact. So as researchers, when we plan our publications, we are also thinking, or we should be thinking, about how we can maximize our impact. And of course, this means more than just academic impact. It means more than just where you get your work published. It means more than just the impact factor of the journal that you select. Research impact, or at least when you talk to the government, when you talk to your university about your research impact, they are thinking also about economic and societal benefits. What difference is your research making to the lives of ordinary people? We are interested in thinking then about research impact as an academic component, but also in terms of economic and societal benefits, in order that you achieve and maximize the impact of your research. You have a rewarding academic publishing experience. How to do this effectively as a researcher is very, very important, because of course, most of us are still counting papers, publications, academic impact. And remember, that's just half the story. Your impact factor. What's your H index? What's the R index? Your institution is interested in citations. They're interested in circulation. But, does your research circulation translate to impact? How many people are actually going to read and actually going to cite your papers? And this is also why journal selection at the start of the writing process is so important. You could publish a paper in Nature or Science, but what if nobody reads it? What if nobody uses it? What if it doesn't translate into policy? What if the paper is not used? And that's the second half of the story, the economic and societal benefits of our research. Academic impact, socio-economic impact, the difference that our research is making to the lives of ordinary people. And I can hear you shouting to one another already, well, hey, in my area, there's less impact factor journals. And of course, as we've talked about before in this presentation, depending upon your research area, there simply will be more journals for you to pick from in order to achieve academic impact. In the humanities and social sciences, business and law, as you can see in the orange and red parts of this figure, there are simply less journals. There are simply less publications in Scopus. There's a lower percentage coverage in Scopus. And for this reason, we advocate, we lobby, we talk to governments, we talk to institutions around the world, because it simply is not fair that institutions or governments say to all of their PhD students, in order to get your PhD, you've got to publish 1 or 2 papers in a Scopus listed journal. It's not a level playing field. Different disciplines have more opportunities to publish research in Scopus listed journals. So we're well aware of this. We are on it. We're talking with the other publishers. We're talking to governments to look at this issue, because coverage is an issue, although we are, all of us, all of the time, thinking about citation analysis, which of course is a way of measuring the impact of an author, an article, or a publication by simply counting the number of times that that author, that article, or that publication has been cited by other works. So you can have a citation index. An article that you publish can have a citation index, and a journal that you publish in can also have a citation index. 3 different ways of measuring academic impact. What's your H index? What's the impact factor of the journal that you're using? What's the citation score of that article that you published 2 or 3 years ago? Very important also to understand how this works. It's retrospective. A paper that I published today will not get a citation score for at least a year, probably longer. A journal that I start today won't get a citation score for several years. It takes time to build up and measure your academic impact, which is also a negative downside to assessing researchers based entirely on this kind of thing. But nevertheless, you should be on the Web of Science. You should be using Scopus. You should have a Google Scholar profile. You should have an ORCID ID, because all of these different tools make it easier for other academics, other researchers around the world to assess you and know about you and evaluate your work and your research. So do get involved with the main ways that researchers are assessed, Google Scholar and ORCID, for example, and be aware of this when you apply for jobs, when you go for grant funding, when you look at presenting your research to the wider world, because of course, field-weighted citation impact is becoming more important, not less important, over time. Whether or not we think this is a good thing is something that we can talk about in the question session at the end of our event today. But it's very important to be aware of this and to be on top of this kind of thing as a researcher, because when you start to put together a project, when you start to design your next research project, you also want to represent that research outside of your own particular subject area. You want to engage people in the research that you do. You want to achieve early impact, and then you want to sustain that impact by reflecting on the impact that your research is making. And this is the socioeconomic side of that wheel of impact that I showed you already. It's very difficult to measure, but it's nevertheless important to keep track of and attempt to be able to report on this kind of impact in your research. Because of course, as we design research projects, there are several ways that we could be thinking about that. I could make a paper, let's say, on the molecular genetics of tobacco, and I could publish that in a molecular genetics journal, and I only then talk, when I'm discussing the impact of that research, about the specific technical aspects of the research that I've done. And that is not the best way to make a maximum impact with your work. You want to engage with stakeholders. You want to be able to explain why your research makes a difference to the lives of ordinary people. And many, many, many researchers are simply not doing this. They're focused specifically on the particular aspects, the particular details of their own research. They're not thinking about how their work makes that broader impact. So my paper on the molecular genetics of tobacco should then be sold to journals, translated, passed on to journals in a much broader, more impactful way. Because of course, every research topic has a broader aspect, a broader, wider angle to it as you talk about why your research is important and interesting. And that, by the way, is the message of your work, the message of your research. Don't get bogged down. Don't just think about the specific details of your research. Let's think about how we can get more and more people, ordinary people, the taxpayers, the general public, people who are funding our research, after all, how we can get them interested in the work that we are doing. Always imagine that your readers do not know anything about your research. You are sharing your research with your readers for the first time. You are going to be giving them information that they will find interesting. And by the way, this is the secret to getting your work published in high impact factor journals. Be general, be interesting. Imagine that you're talking to somebody who doesn't know anything about your research. Where's the big picture? What's the key issue? What solution does your research solve? What question does your research answer that everybody will find interesting? So think about your impact as you go through your research projects. During the project, as many inputs as possible, outputs as possible online, submit for posters and other speaking engagements, build up a network of people who are interested in your research during the project as the research is ongoing. On publication, you connect that final publication to other related outputs from your research group and from your university, and summarize that work in plain language. We provide that service, by the way, at Bentham. We're able to help you to share your research effectively with the wider world. And don't forget to tell people that you've published. I used to do this all the time myself. I used to publish papers, but then not talk about those papers, not share those papers with anybody else. And keep your work alive by connecting it to new materials. You've got a research team. You're part of a research team. You're part of a laboratory of researchers, perhaps. Do you have a website? Are you talking about your communication tools? Do you know which methods of communication are most effective for you? Because in different regions around the world, different researchers use different tools for communication. Instagram, WeChat, Facebook, Twitter, ResearchGate, LinkedIn, I don't know, but you need to be on top of your channels for communicating your research so that you can do this effectively. Because research impact and planning your research for publication in high impact factor journals is a journey. It doesn't just end with publication. It involves messaging your papers, discovering which journals you can publish your work in most effectively, and ensuring that you have good structure to the writing to get the message across as effectively as possible. So take a screenshot of this, take this away, because this is an absolutely fantastic graphic for the next time you have to do a grant application, or for the next time you have to talk about your research online. You've got your inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. You're building a story around your research impact as a journey from the beginning of the project towards the end. And it's important Very important, because we are increasingly engaging with the public. We're expected to do this as researchers, but most people have no idea how they're benefiting the people that they interact with. Researchers, of course, are increasingly expected to be able to articulate the value of their work with the public, to justify funding, to demonstrate the impact of our research. So why is it important to evaluate public engagement? Communicate about your research. And if you'd like more information about this, we would be delighted to provide additional training from Bentham in order that you can evaluate the design of your engagement with the public and policy makers, because this is effective research impact. What attention does your next paper generate? It's interest, it's desire and action. Take measurements of these different metrics. How great would it be to be able to report these different metrics in your next job interview or in your next grant application? How many times has your research been shared? How many times has it been mentioned, cited? How many clicks? How many views? How many downloads? What kind of press coverage? And then finally, how many citations has your paper achieved? And most people, they focus on the last of these. They don't think about all of the other different components of assessing impact. And you can develop this as a skill set, because being able to talk about your research effectively is a skill. It's something that you can learn. It's not a talent. You're not born with the ability to talk about your research and make great online presentations, face-to-face presentations. You can develop a presentation skill set and become an effective storyteller. And of course, very important, I love to share this particular slide because one of my favorite writers, fantasy fiction writer called Terry Pratchett, he always used to say that people like to be told what they already know. They get uncomfortable when you tell them new things. So building up your research articles incrementally, building on research and publication results that have come before. Research is mostly incremental, building on things that people already know. Large steps forward are much harder to get published in the academic literature. So do keep that in mind. People will be reading your papers and they will be thinking, I expected that result. I agree with that result. I think that's correct. And that's what you want people to feel. That's what you want people to say when they read your papers. Peer reviewers, editors, other researchers who are going to be using and citing your papers, you want them to agree with you. Peer reviewers, if they agree with you, they'll give your work more favorable comments in the peer review process. Other researchers will cite your papers if they feel that the work is correct. So be incremental. Build on research that has come before. Large steps are much harder to get published in the academic literature. And with that in mind, let's go back to what we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, the 3 things to know, before you begin to write. Message, audience, that's your target journal, and we've talked about how to select a target journal already in this presentation, and structure. By the way, the structure comes from the target journal. As we've talked about already, lots of researchers, they write up their papers and then they think, where am I going to publish this article? And that's not the most effective way to operate as a writing and publishing academic in order to be efficient. Have a target journal in mind. Your target journal will then answer many of the questions that you have about structure. And this slide summarizes the general structure of a research article. Of course, the title, the abstract, the keywords are one part of your paper, and they perform a very different function to the rest of the paper, the main text, the so-called IMRAD component, the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. You want your title, your abstract, and your keywords to be effective for indexing and searching. They need to be informative. They need to be attractive. They need to be effective. And the rest of the paper contains components that have distinct functions. So let's talk a little bit in this final component of our presentation today about how to write an effective title and how to put together an effective abstract, because you may very well need to share these components with an editor when it comes time. I think, let me just stop for a moment because we've got quite a lot of background noise. Did we manage to mute? I think so, right? Okay. I could barely hear myself shouting, so that's important to mute. So we'll have lots of time for questions at the end of our presentation. But as you start to put together your article structure, you think about a title, you think about an abstract, and you think about keywords as distinct components of the article writing process to the rest of the paper. Keep in mind that very often your editor and your peer reviewers, and also often other researchers, they won't read the whole of the paper. They'll just read the title, they'll just read the abstract. You can ask yourself, how many times have you read all the way through an academic paper recently? Most people don't. They just read the title and they look at the abstract. So these have to be well written, very, very important to capture your audience's attention to ensure that your paper has the maximum possible chance of peer review initially. Most important stage initially is making sure that your paper gets out for peer review. Big journals, your Natures, your Sciences, they've got very high desk rejection rates, 9 out of 10 papers. 90% of the submissions that go to Nature, for example, get rejected without being sent out for peer review. So we used to have parties when we got our papers sent out for peer review at journals like Nature. It's a big step just to get that email back from the editor saying, we've decided to send your paper out for peer review. How do you maximize your chances of getting your paper through the editorial stage and out for peer review? Well, you need a good title and a good abstract, but the title is very important. Keep it short. The best titles have the fewest possible words, adequately describing the contents of the paper. Keep it short. Identify the main issue, the subject. Be accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete, and don't use infrequently encountered abbreviations. Above all, you've got to attract people's attention. Did you know that titles with 7 words and less actually get more citations than titles with more than 7 words in them? Yes, that's right. Research has been done on this question. So you want a title with the fewest possible words. Adequately describe the contents of your paper, keeping your title short, concise, and informative. The most important words related to the topic entice your readers, but don't give away the punch line. You do not want to necessarily use what we call a descriptive title that says drug X is a cure for cancer, because no one's going to read the rest of the paper if you tell them the answer to the question in the title. Be a bit more ambiguous, entice people, but don't give away the punchline. Don't be over sensational, of course, as well, but you need a short and compelling title. Very important. If you'd like more training on this, we've got whole webinars, whole presentations we can give you on academic article writing. I can talk for hours just about titles if that's something that is important for you, but short and effective. Here are some examples from some of Bentham's leading journals: Current Neuropharmacology, Frontiers, Developments, Current Medicinal Chemistry. Short titles, less than 7 words. This is what you want to maximize the interest in your research and to make sure, to ensure that your paper goes out for peer review. Don't be in that group of authors whose papers get rejected at the journal editorial office stage. A good title, and perhaps if we have time at the end of this presentation today, we can talk more with you individually. You can share with us some ideas that you have for your next research paper title, and we can give you some feedback on whether they're good, effective, eye-catching, engaging, alluring, attractive titles or not. What about the abstract? Very difficult piece of writing to get correct. You've got to write something that's honest and precise. It's got to stand alone because, of course, this is often all that people read. Always imagine that you're writing your abstract for a conference presentation where it is all that people are going to get to read. Short and specific, no technical jargon, and often no references. The quality of your abstract, 200 words, 250 words, it's going to inform your editor's decision, peer reviewers and readers, but keep it good quality, honest and precise, standing alone, short and specific. There really is a trick to writing an effective abstract. And sadly, many authors, they write the abstract at the end of the process in a big rush, almost as an afterthought. This is a mistake. It's got to be a concise, standalone piece of writing with a very clear message containing all of the information in your article, because it's often all that people are going to read. If you struggle with writing effective abstracts, have a go at the 4-question technique that we're sharing with you on the bottom of this slide. What you do is you write down these 4 questions and then you answer them with information from your particular piece of research. And then you delete the questions and you'll end up, I guarantee it, with about 100, 150 words that you can then edit together, start to put together as the basis for your abstract. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? Why did you do it? Well, that's the introduction. What did you do? Well, that's the methods. What did you find? Well, that's the results. What did you conclude? Of course, the significance and the conclusion. 4 questions in sequence, because of course the abstract has to have a structure to it as well. But if you answer these 4 questions in sequence, you will be well on the way to having an effective abstract for your next paper. We do this in writing workshops. We write down these questions, we get people to answer those questions, we then delete the questions, we build out academic abstracts for research papers that are effective, alluring, eye-catching, attention-grabbing, ensuring that your paper, your research has the best possible chance of successfully going out for peer review and successfully being published. Because message, audience and structure are very important as you plan your research for publication in high impact factor journals. Readers need to know where they've come from, where they're going, and where they are now. It's just like watching a movie. It's just like reading a detective story. It's important to have a structure. A plot is needed. A paper, an academic paper, it's just like any other piece of creative writing. Now, I know it's difficult. I know it's not easy writing and publishing in a 2nd or 3rd language, but that's okay because we are here to help. Message, audience, and structure, helping you to prepare to write up your research for effective publication in high impact factor journals. So, your topic. You look at your audience, you identify that purpose, and you start to gather supporting information from your message, from your target journal, and from the structure of the writing. And what we do is we provide roadmaps. We help people to prepare to write. We help them with things to think about before they even put pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard or whatever. How to sell yourself, how to capture an editor's attention, how to write a paper with effective structure, because without a clear structure, everybody is going to get lost. An effective English academic writing. We have other presentations on this if these are of interest to anybody listening to our talk today. If you'd like us to come back in the future and talk about effective English writing, we would obviously love to do that, because there are some simple rules in writing in English that can make a huge difference to your chances of eventual acceptance. So, as we come to the end of this section of our time together today, and there'll be lots of time for questions, what have we talked about? I hear you ask, what has he been shouting about for the last 45 minutes? We've talked about journal selection. We've talked about maximizing your impact, socioeconomic as well as academic impact, and we've given you a little bit of information about how to write an effective title and an effective abstract as we build out those impactful publications. And of course, what's the point of all of this? It is to help you be more effective as an academic writing and publishing. We are Bentham Science Publishers. Franz is here, Enrique's here to answer any specific questions from the perspective of the publisher, from the perspective of the journals and ebooks that we have. You can follow us on a range of different social media channels. Do get in touch with Dr. Franz Lettenstrom if you would like to have any more information about Bentham content. And with that, I will say thank you very much for the opportunity to do this presentation today. I will stop sharing my screen. Let me just give you Franz's contact information there. Franz@benthamscience.net. Do write him an email. Do reach out just to say hello. He loves to get emails. He'd be happy to talk to you more, of course, about any of the content that we have discussed and that we have shared today. Thank you once again. And with that, I will hand the baton back over to one of our colleagues, and we'll stay here for any questions or comments or feedback that you may have. Thank you again for the opportunity to give this presentation.
Thank you very much, Gareth. It was an amazing presentation, and I'm pretty sure that maybe people could have any questions. A cualquiera de vosotros, si tenéis alguna pregunta para Gareth, pues él estará encantado de responderos.
You can ask questions, of course, in Spanish. You don't have to ask them in English. We've got Franz is here as well, so he can field questions, of course. So don't be shy. If you don't want to speak in English, that's also completely fine.
Gareth.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I'm Julia David from Universidad Complutense, of course, and I enjoyed a lot what you said about the need to consider all these impact factors, the age index and all that. So I would like you to, if possible, to elaborate a little bit more on those other indexes, right? We all know what the impact factor is, but when you have your Google Scholar profile, you have your age index and the other indexes. And I wonder whether you could be a little bit more elaborate. You could elaborate on that, because
Sure.
that would help probably younger researchers to
of course.
further research, which does not actually depend on the quality of the research, right? It depends on many other factors, right?
Absolutely.
So if you elaborate on that, I would appreciate it.
Sure, of course. So like we talked about in the presentation, an individual researcher, an individual journal, and an individual article can all have different impact metrics, okay? So an impact factor most common way of assessing journals is calculated retrospectively. Okay, so there's a big company called Clarivate Analytics that calculates impact factors for journals, and they do that every year, but the impact factors are 2 years out of date. Okay, so they're giving you impact factors for that journal from 2 years ago. So if you look today at the impact factor of a journal, Nature, for example, you see that that impact factor is 40. That's simply a measure of the number of articles that have been published in that journal that have that number of citations, right? So a journal with an impact factor of 10 has, in the last 2 years, published up to 10 papers that themselves have been cited 10 times, okay, basically speaking. So that's why journals with higher impact factors are considered to be better places to try to publish our research, because we'll get more academic impact when we publish in those journals. And it's the same with H-index, okay? If you look on Google Scholar, you'll see that different researchers have different H-indices. This is a number that's simply a measure of the number of papers that that researcher has published measured against the number of citations, okay? So you could publish hundreds of papers, right? But if nobody cites those papers, then your H-index will remain low, okay? So a researcher with an H-index of 10 has published at least 10 papers that themselves have been cited at least 10 times, okay? So it's a measure of the number of publications and the number of citations. So that's why it's considered to be the fairest, or one of the fairest ways to assess researchers, because if we just counted your number of publications, that's meaningless, because those publications may have appeared in the literature, but if they've not been cited by somebody else, then what's the point of them having been published? Okay, so that's the difference between an impact factor and an H-index. I hope that helps. Does that help?
Yes, I get that. But yeah, thank you. I was thinking, you know, in the humanities areas where, as you know, there are many less journals than in the hard sciences, for example, or biological sciences. We tend to publish a lot in books, chapters in books. And so there you go. You can get lots of publications, lots of chapters in books, and maybe they're not, you know, cited, or they're, you know, not as frequently cited as in other high impact journals. So how could this situation be solved? Because that doesn't mean that your research is less quality, that the researcher is, you know, less apt or less prestigious. This is something, you know, that's very annoying, I would say, you know, and it's not fair. It's not fair on the humanities researchers. So
I agree, absolutely.
What's your take on that?
I'm going to join you, Julia, because I was going to say exactly the same. Thank you very much, Gareth, for your excellent presentation. And I'm from the arts specifically. I work on art, science, technology, and it's absolutely so difficult to find journals to publish. I mean, and probably the questions are related to high tech and microbiology, for example, but it's impossible to publish in this kind of journals. So I wonder if you have any kind of suggestions for the people involved in these areas, because we usually feel I don't know, very depressed after these presentations. Yeah, I feel that you don't have any journal in Vietnam related to art, and also I haven't seen in the publications in the books any book related to art. But maybe you have any suggestion for us.
Within Bentham, at the moment, we are working on developing new journals in the humanities and social sciences. So maybe if you'd like to start a journal or talk to Franz about that, that would be very welcome, because at the moment, the 163 journals that we publish are STEM journals predominantly. I don't know, Franz, are you listening to this? Do you want to say a few things about this from your perspective, maybe? Is he there? Is he there? Okay, never mind. Because we are looking at starting new journals, developing new journals in these areas. My advice on this is just to be vocal about it, because it's a well-known issue internationally, and some countries, some governments, some institutions are much more aware of it than others, because of course the way that academics get assessed is strongly biased towards academics working in the STEM disciplines. I mean,
yeah, exactly. We are exactly in this moment.
Yeah,
we are trying to land a journal in an international dimension, and but we don't find very well how to do it. So it's been quite difficult.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe we can
also the book chapters and book chapters as well, right? That's another, we can say, channel of publication, which is completely ignored. Well, not completely, but it is very much below the standards in evaluations. And it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
It doesn't make sense from the actual philosophy of research, because you should have different channels of publication, not just impact factors, especially in the humanities.
Exactly. I agree completely. And so for that reason, like publishers like Bentham are trying to promote this problem and work with governments, work with institutions, and talk about what impact is in a broader context than just impact factor. And so hopefully I've done a little bit of that in our presentation today. But researchers also need to change their mindsets about what it means to be impactful with their publications, you know? Anyway,
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments. Yeah, like we can talk more, of course, like in other forums, and people are asking for English seminars. Like we'd be very happy to provide those. Absolutely. Writing and publishing in English. We have a whole menu of different webinars and training that we can provide if that's of interest to people listening to this.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anyone else? Esther, you have your hand up. I see.
Yeah, but I already said everything.
Oh, you did. Sorry, I can't see. Like Enrique.
Okay.
Perdona, Enrique, Teresa Duelo también ha levantado la mano, si quiere intervenir. Teresa, ¿quieres salir tu micro?
Sí.
Thank you. Good morning to you. Thank you a lot for your presentation. I think it's very interesting, the idea to send the abstracts to 100 editors to explore their interests. And I would like to know what would happen if 2 of them show interest, because you can't send your paper to one journal. So what do you say to the second one? How do you handle that?
Okay, that's a great question. So you send out pre-submission inquiries to different journals. Editors come back with, favorable responses, favorable comments. Like I would go then with the journal that has the higher impact factor or the more prestigious journal within your field. And there's no need to say anything to the other editor other than perhaps, I'm still working on the paper. I'll get back to you once the paper is complete, and make your submission to the first journal. And, you've got probably, if it gets peer reviewed, you're going to be waiting for like 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, probably. And then that's enough time that you don't have to take the paper. You don't have to tell one of the editors, sorry, I'm going to submit to another journal. Just say, thank you for your positive response. I'm currently working on the paper. I'll get back to you when the paper's finished. I think that's an absolutely fantastic outcome if you've got more than one journal editor actually writing back to you and saying, yes, we'd love to see that paper submitted to our journal, because of course, mostly they won't reply at all. If they do reply, they might say, send it in for peer review. So, I mean, it's a great situation to be in. That's a really positive situation to be in. Thank you for that question. That's a great question.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Pía, cuando quieras puedes intervenir también.
Hola, ¿se me escucha?
Sí, Pía.
Hi, okay, I forgot the question. Okay, it was about the impact. If do you have any recommendation or tool on how to compare the keywords which are relevant for both journals and search engines?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. How to compare keywords for publications. This depends upon your research field, the answer to this question, because in different research fields, there are different databases of keywords. Okay, so I don't know your research field, but if you search like medical keywords, biological keywords, chemical keywords, humanities keywords, you know, you'll find a database that you can then use to evaluate your keywords versus other ones that have been used in the past. And another great thing that you can do is look at papers that have previously been published in your field that have gotten lots of citations. And you'll know from your own research area which are the key papers in your field. Everybody knows that. Everybody's got like, you know, 10 or 15 papers that they use all the time, that they cite all the time, that they work with all the time, that are the key papers in their research area. And that might change depending on the question that you're currently working on, but look at their keywords. Look at the keywords that those papers use, because you can use, of course you can, the same keywords as other highly cited papers in your field. So I would do that. Find a database, and if you get in touch with me afterwards, I can help you find subject area specific databases for your own research field, and look at other papers that have previously been highly cited in your area. And don't forget, final comment on this, your title and your keywords, those keywords that you enter into the manuscript submission system, have to be different. Don't use keywords into the manuscript submission system that you've already got in the title, because the search databases, they use the title and the keywords together, right? So if you put the same words into your keywords that are already in the title, you're wasting keywords. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so if I write a paper that's like, you know, drug X is the cure for cancer, right? I can't use, or I shouldn't use, the name of the drug, cancer, cure in my keywords. I've got to use different words because you want your paper to be as discoverable as possible. Different words from the title in the keywords. Great question. Thank you for that question.
And Gareth, there is a question from Blanca Perez Montero in the chat. You can answer her.
I see. When choosing a title, Blanca says, sometimes the most attractive phrase would be to state the main finding of the research. Yeah, you don't want to do that, Blanca, because if you talk about the main finding of your research in the title, you decrease the probability that people are going to read the whole paper. Okay, you want to be a bit deceptive. You want to say a new drug is the cure for cancer, for example, and then people are going to think, oh, I've got to read this paper. I'm going to go in and find out what that drug is, rather than saying drug X is the cure for cancer in the title. That's called a descriptive title, right? And often medical journals in particular, they don't want those kinds of titles because they want people to read the whole paper. In some subject areas like medicine, for example, it's actually really important that the paper gets read, not just the title, because you wouldn't want people to use a drug or prescribe a drug or perform a clinical process without having fully understood that process for themselves. Okay, so when choosing a title, go for a short, alluring, attractive, enticing title that's going to get people interested in reading the paper. Think about the readers. Think about what you can say, Blanca, that will get people thinking, I must read this paper. Anyone else?
There's a new question in the chat. Antonio Portoles. What about a question as a title?
Okay, yeah, Antonio, thank you for that. Yeah, what about the question as a title? And this is often done in academic papers, right? People might write it. This is called an interrogative title, by the way. Interrogative because it asks a question. Which drugs are best as cures for cancer? Could be the title of a paper, right? It's often done, but I don't really recommend that it's such a good strategy because there are better ways, I think, to formulate a title that's interesting, attractive, and that captures people's interest than a question, although you see it done a lot. So I don't know, you could do it, Antonio, you could. People do it a lot, but let's try to make it, interesting. And I just want to repeat what I said to Blanca just now. You got to think about your readers. You got to think about people reading the paper. And I think a lot of academic authors, they write for themselves, or they write with their own research group in mind, or they write with other people, that they work with in mind. Okay, they're too technical, too impenetrable, and you really need to make your research as broadly interesting, as broadly appealing as possible, so that the maximum number of people are going to read it. And that is the secret, by the way, to getting your work in higher impact factor journals, because the readership is bigger, right? And that's what's necessary, to find a way to sell your research to as many other colleagues as possible, not just within your own narrow research field. Thank you for that question. Anyone else? I saw a hand just went up. Javier has his hand up.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been trying for quite a bit, but so I was saying before that thank you very much for the nice presentation, Gareth. It's been very interesting.
Thank you, sir. It's nice of you.
So I have a very specific question about something that you said, a couple of times during your presentation, and it's about shifting the way you write the paper towards a more didactic, or writing the paper towards a broader audience, and sometimes sacrificing some of the technical details. So I was wondering, do you have more advice on that? Like, how much can you sacrifice, or can you divide the content of your results towards publishing something for a broad audience and leaving some details for a more specific journal? Do you have some thoughts on that?
That's excuse me, that's a great question. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, I mean, because we should be aiming to get our work into journals with the broadest possible readership, one of the skills, I think, one of the tricks that successful researchers have developed is this ability to target their research to broad questions. And this is part of the research planning process as well, by the way. I mean, when you decide what to work on, what research questions to work on, there's definitely a skill there in picking and targeting research questions that are broadly appealing to more people. And more experienced, more successful researchers have developed that skill as well, because, at the end of the day, like in my research field, maybe 5 or 6 other people are really interested in the specific details, right? So that means that you can provide that information, but you don't have to provide that information in the main part of the paper, potentially in an appendix or in an online supplement, or in information that is available to those readers who are specifically interested in the details. I don't know if that helps, but
I think it does. Yeah. So I understand that you're saying that maybe sacrifice some of those details, put it in the supporting information, maybe.
Yeah.
Have a more clear and message, on point message or something, and then for a broader audience, that those technical details don't matter. So okay, I understand.
I mean, we used to do PhD interviews when I worked in Southampton, at the university in Southampton, for UK research students who were going to get money from the government, right? So they were going to do PhD projects funded by the government, funded by the UK government. And one of the questions that they always got asked was, how are you going to explain this research project to your grandmother? or to somebody that you've just met on the bus, or to somebody that you're talking to in a cafe. It's a very common interview question for PhD students, at least in the UK, right? Because people get very focused on the specific details, especially at early career stages. I find like you get very, very specifically focused on your PhD project, let's say, but it is critically important to be able to explain why this research is important to a broader audience, not just for science communication purposes, but also for publication purposes, because you will not get research published in high impact factor journals if you can't do that. You'll get it published in the journal of, you know, specific details relating to your field. You know, like it's really a key skill and so important to emphasize for young researchers. You know, it's you know, my father, you know, he worked on atmospheric chemistry for his whole career, publishing lots of papers in the Journal of Physical Chemistry, or like, you know, this, I mean, there's no link that was made between this research and bigger questions like climate change until much later, when this became a much bigger issue. But I would argue that every research field has that broader context. Identifying that broader context and talking about that broader context in your publications means that you will get your papers into journals with bigger readerships. You know, I think it's really, really an important skill.
Okay,
So
well, thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Great, thanks so much.
Gareth, we have another question in the chat.
Sure.
Miguel Ángel Ruiz García. You can
Oh, I see. Yeah. Thank you, Miguel. Could the editors of high impact factor journals get tired of a scientist who submits multiple times to their journal? Yeah, you have to be careful and you have to target your submissions. That's why, Miguel, it's so important to ask editors early in the process if your research results are going to be of interest to that journal. Because if you just keep making submissions, then that does look bad. And after a while, you're going to develop a reputation for sending lots of papers, you know, into that particular journal. So everybody will develop the ability as they go on in their careers to identify important results from their research. And you're going to publish papers that go into lower impact factor journals. You're going to do lots of research that is not earth-shattering, that is not Nature, cover of science, like, you know, Scientific American kind of research projects. But I mean, it is a good skill to develop, to target your research and develop like that ability. So yeah, like thank you for that question. I hope I answered it in a helpful way, but yeah, don't just make lots of submissions to the same journal. Write to editors first, ask them if your results are interesting for them. They may suggest a different journal. That happens often as well. They might say, well, Miguel, perhaps this result is not going to be in Nature this time, but why don't you send it to Scientific Reports, or why don't you send it to Nature Medicine, or Nature Genetics, or Nature Climate Change, or Nature Geoscience, or one of the other journals within our family of journals. So thank you for that.
Creo que no hay más preguntas, Carmen, ¿correcto?
No, I think there are no more questions. Oh,
Okay.
just one new question.
Oh, I see. Gareth, are journals open to read proposals of articles? Well, yes, that's what we're talking about. Absolutely. Like what you're doing with a pre-submission inquiry is you're sending the journal editor an email saying, I've just finished this piece of research. Here are the key outcomes. Here are the key messages. Would this be something that you would consider for your journal? And so, yes, that's a pre-submission inquiry, a proposal. You haven't written the article yet, but you're thinking of writing the article. You're targeting a journal for that submission. So absolutely, journal editors actually appreciate it because it means that they don't have to deal with lots and lots and lots of submissions. They can select from your pre-submission inquiry, and it also helps you because you're in the mind of the journal editor when you come to make that full submission. So thanks for that question. I hope my answer was helpful. Related to my previous question, if the abstract also reveals the main findings, then people will not read the full text. Well, yeah, I mean, very unfortunately, that is the case, Blanca. Like, people tend not to read the whole of the paper. Your trick and what you're aiming for as a successful writer is making sure that people do read the whole of your paper. And that comes with effective writing skills, which hopefully is something that we'll be coming back to talk about in a later presentation. So yeah, like, you've got to give the reader enough information in the abstract. Yes, it's got to stand alone. So all of the key findings have to be there in the abstract, but you also want people to read the rest of the paper. So there's a trick to doing that. Thank you for that great question.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Thank you for your presentation. It's been a pleasure. It was really interesting. You raised a lot of interest, and I hope we can count on you for another seminar in the future. If Enrique, si estás de acuerdo.
Por supuesto, yeah, of course. I have the full information that Garrett shared with us about the webinars. I think I'm quite sure that everybody else is agreed that this seminar was a great success. You only have to see that the time we spent with the tabs and the answers. So congrats, Garrett. Of course, Carmen, I will share with you the other possibilities regarding the webinars, and we'll be in contact. And thank you very much, Garrett. It was amazing, believe me.
Thank you very much. I hope see you soon. Bye.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias a todos y a todas. Hasta la próxima.